The house always felt too quiet on Thursdays. The kind of quiet that sits on your shoulders and makes the ticking of the wall clock sound louder than it should. But for Walter Bennett, this kind of quiet had become a companion, not an enemy. He had learned to live inside it, just as he had learned to live inside the empty spaces his daughter left behind. At 71, Walter had his routines down to an art. Thursdays were his preparation days, not for errands or chores, but for Sundays. More specifically for Father's Day Sunday, which was now only 3 days away. It had been Claire's idea to visit this year. She called the week before, just after dinner, when the sun was folding into the trees outside his living room window. "I can come by for a couple of hours," she had said, her voice brisk but polite. "Just a quick visit before I head to Mom and Richard's garden thing." Walter had smiled even though she couldn't see it. "That sounds nice," he said, trying not to sound too eager. "Nothing big, okay? No speeches, just something light." Of course. She had hung up before he could ask how she was doing. Now, days later, he was peeling carrots at the kitchen counter, surrounded by notes he had scribbled on yellowing index cards, timings, seasoning ratios, which dish to start when. The roast was already marinating. He had rubbed it down that morning with rosemary, garlic, and cracked black pepper, just the way Claire used to like it before she moved across the country and started ordering takeout more often than she cooked. The potatoes, red-skinned and small, were sitting in a colander in the sink, waiting to be washed. The silverware had been polished, the linen napkins ironed. There was a fresh loaf of bread resting under a towel near the stove, and he had baked it himself, even though he could barely taste bread these days without it sticking to his dentures. Walter didn't mind the effort. It was how he spoke. He was not a man of many words, never had been, but he believed in showing up, in making things with your hands, in details. That was how he had loved Claire her whole life, through action, through presence, through the roast beef dinners he cooked even after Helen left and took the better part of the house's laughter with her. The photo on the window ledge hadn't moved in 15 years. Claire, 6 years old, missing her front teeth, wearing a paper crown they had made together for Father's Day. She was holding a crayon drawing that said, "I love you, Daddy," in big, uneven letters. He dusted it once a week, every Thursday, and still she had called him Walter the last time she came. Not Dad, just Walter, like he was the neighbor, the man who happened to live in the house where her childhood once bloomed. He had pretended not to notice. There was a heaviness to the kitchen that afternoon, even with the windows cracked open and the early summer breeze drifting in. The breeze smelled like cut grass and honeysuckle. It reminded him of the days when Claire would run barefoot through the yard, chasing butterflies with a net too big for her hands. Now she barely stayed long enough to finish a cup of coffee. Still, Walter kept preparing. That was the way he loved. Without drama, without applause. He set the table with 4 places, one for her, one for himself, and 2 more, just in case. Maybe Helen would come. Maybe not. Maybe Claire would bring someone. Maybe she wouldn't. But he would be ready. At exactly 4 o'clock, Walter stepped outside and walked down to the corner mailbox. His knees ached a little more each week, but he never complained. He liked the feel of the gravel under his shoes, the way the sunlight fell through the leaves. It made him feel grounded, anchored to something solid, even as the world kept spinning further away from him. There was only one letter inside, a retirement plan update from a company that had gone bankrupt years ago. He smiled at the irony, folded the envelope in half, and slid it into his pocket. On the way back, he paused at the edge of his lawn. The grass needed trimming. The hydrangeas were starting to droop. He made a mental note to take care of them tomorrow. Claire wouldn't notice, probably, but he would know. And that was enough. Back in the house, he washed his hands, checked the roast again, and pulled out the good china. It had belonged to his mother. Delicate blue rims, tiny imperfections from age and use. Claire used to pretend they were royal plates when she was little. She would sit at the table with a blanket over her shoulders and demand to be called Your Majesty. He set them out carefully, smiling at the memory. The sun dipped lower. Shadows stretched across the floor. He sat down at the kitchen table, the one he had refinished himself years ago, and took a long, slow sip of water. He looked at the chair across from him, empty, for now, but she was coming, even if only for a little while, even if only to pass through, and for Walter, that was enough reason to make everything ready. Walter wasn't expecting her until Sunday. So when he saw the silver car pull into the driveway early Friday afternoon, he thought perhaps it was a neighbor, or a delivery, or someone lost, looking for the next street over. But then Claire stepped out. She wore dark sunglasses and a white blouse tucked neatly into gray trousers, the kind made from expensive fabric that did not wrinkle. She moved with purpose, her shoulders stiff, one hand carrying a slim black folder, the other scrolling through her phone. She didn't wave, didn't smile, just glanced up briefly, like confirming she was at the right place. Walter opened the front door before she reached it. "Claire," he said, surprised. "This is early." She looked up from her phone. "I had a break between meetings and figured I'd beat the weekend traffic. Hope that's okay." "Of course," he said, stepping aside. "It's always okay." She moved into the house quickly, her heels clicking against the wood floor. The scent of perfume, light, floral, unfamiliar, floated behind her like something that did not belong in that space. Walter followed her slowly, unsure if this was a visit or a transaction. She paused in the living room, looking around like someone revisiting a place from long ago. She didn't sit. Walter motioned toward the kitchen. "I was just making coffee." "No time," she said, checking her phone again. "I actually came because I wanted to talk about something. Business-related." He hesitated, then nodded. "All right." She set the folder on the coffee table and opened it. The pages inside were crisp, perfectly aligned, full of charts, timelines, bullet points. She turned one toward him and tapped it with a neatly manicured finger. "I'm starting a new company," she said. "Brand consulting. I've got 2 partners already, and we're looking to launch in 60 days. We've got projections, contacts, early interest." Walter sat in the armchair across from her, listening. "We're not just doing marketing," she continued. "We're offering strategy, identity design. We're bridging tech and storytelling in a way no one else in our segment is doing." She sounded rehearsed, not dishonest, but polished. Too polished for this living room, with its framed childhood photos and the ticking of a clock older than her startup. "I'm proud of you," Walter said sincerely. She nodded. "Thanks. That means a lot. And I'm hoping you might want to be a part of it." He blinked. "Me?" "As an investor," she clarified, already flipping to the next page. "We're looking for early capital to cover startup costs, office space, equipment, branding, legal fees. I've talked to a few people. Richard said he might help, but I wanted to come to you first. You always said I should believe in myself." Walter looked down at the numbers. "Claire, how much are you asking for?" She didn't hesitate. 100,000. He sat back in his chair, letting the figure settle between them like a sudden gust of wind. "I've drawn up formal terms," she continued, flipping another page. "Repayment over 3 years. Modest interest. I don't expect charity. I want this to be clean, professional." Walter folded his hands in his lap. "Why not go to a bank?" "I did," she said, her voice tightening slightly. "They said it would take weeks to process, and they'd need collateral. We don't have time for that. I need someone who believes in me without paperwork slowing everything down." He nodded slowly, trying to stay composed. Claire sat down finally, crossed her legs, and rested her hands in her lap. "I know it's a lot, but it would mean the world to me if my first investor was someone who understands me, someone who's seen me work hard all my life." He looked at her, at the grown woman with ambition in her voice and a pitch in her posture, at the child who used to fall asleep in the back seat holding a stuffed bear and a chocolate milk, at the teenager who once yelled that he didn't get it when he told her to be home by 10. She was all of them, and none of them. "I'll think about it," Walter said, his voice quiet. Claire smiled, satisfied. That's all I ask. She gathered the folder, stood, and smoothed her blouse. I should head out. Dinner with Mom and Richard. They're waiting. You're not staying? Even for a minute? Next time, she said, already turning toward the door. Sunday, like we planned. You don't need to go overboard, okay? Just something simple. He nodded again, slower this time. Of course. She walked to the car without looking back. She didn't hug him, didn't ask how he was doing. She climbed in, adjusted her sunglasses, and drove away, still on the phone. Walter stood in the doorway for a moment, then closed the door quietly behind him. The living room felt different now. The space she had just occupied seemed colder, untouched. The envelope of numbers and business ideas sat unopened on the table. Walter walked over to it, touched it gently, then sat down and stared at it. $100,000. She had said it like it was a key, a solution, as if all he had to do was open a drawer and write a check. But drawers like that didn't exist in this house. Not anymore. Not since Helen left and the retirement funds dried up. Not since the hospital bills and the slow, quiet erosion of savings made to last a life that had turned out longer than expected. Not since the heating system broke and he chose to fix it over taking a vacation. She didn't know. She didn't ask. And maybe that was what hurt more than the money. The fact that she walked in asking for something without looking around. Without noticing the cracked floor tile near the hallway, the faded upholstery on the armchair, the hand-sewn curtains he had never replaced. He wasn't angry, but the ache in his chest felt older than today. Walter rose earlier than usual on Saturday. The sun had not yet broken the horizon, and the light outside was still a soft gray that painted the trees in gentle outlines. The house was quiet, as always, but today that quiet held something different, an undercurrent of weight, like a storm building behind calm skies. He did not make breakfast. He simply put on his best button-down shirt, the blue one with the small tear under the right sleeve that no one ever noticed, and pulled on the brown shoes he saved for church and funerals. He ran a comb through his thinning gray hair, splashed cold water on his face, and stood in front of the mirror for a moment longer than usual. Then, with careful hands, he gathered the documents he had tucked into an old leather folder the night before. Bank statements, pension stubs, the remaining pages of his mortgage, a few yellowed savings bonds tucked between envelopes marked, "Do not discard." By 7:30, he was in his car, heading into town. His first stop was the bank. The branch manager was a young man named Tyler, sharp suit, polite tone, no-nonsense smile. He greeted Walter kindly, offering him a bottle of water as they sat in a small glass office with a fake plant in the corner. Walter explained the situation. Not all the details, just enough. A family opportunity, some business support, a need for funds. Temporary, of course. He placed the folder on the desk and opened it slowly, pointing out the numbers, the records, the history of reliability. Tyler listened, nodding here and there, occasionally typing something into his computer. When Walter finished, there was a pause. "Mr. Bennett," Tyler said gently, "you've done everything right. I can see that. But based on current guidelines, and with no active income stream, your age bracket and asset profile make this request high risk." Walter sat back slightly. "Even with the house as collateral? The equity helps, but you'd be looking at high interest, short terms. Nothing like what you'd expect for this kind of loan." "I've never missed a payment," Walter said, not defensively, but as a fact. "I believe you," Tyler replied. "And I wish that counted for more these days." Walter nodded slowly, then smiled, polite, small, and gathered his papers. "Thank you for your time. Of course, if anything changes." Walter was already standing. "I'll let you know." His second stop was not planned. He found himself parked outside a pawn shop on Lincoln Avenue, one of those places with neon signs and security cameras, the kind of place that offered cash for anything that had a little shine left in it. Walter stared at the shop for a long time. Then he reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a small tote bag. Inside were three things: Helen's string of wedding pearls, the gold pocket watch his father had given him on his 21st birthday, and a pair of silver candlesticks, untouched since their 25th anniversary. He sat there, fingers tightening on the handles of the bag, his chest heavy with something unnameable. Finally, he got out of the car. The shop smelled of old electronics and regret. A tired-looking man behind the glass counter glanced up without enthusiasm. Walter placed the items on the glass. "These have been in my family for a long time," he said. "What can you offer?" The man examined them silently, turning each item over with practiced hands. "400, he said after a minute. Walter stared. "For all of it?" The man shrugged. "Market's slow. Sentimental value doesn't buy groceries." Walter nodded once, slowly. Then he reached forward, gently lifted each item off the glass, and placed them back in the tote. "Thank you," he said, and turned to leave. By noon, he was back home, sitting at the kitchen table, his folder and tote beside him. The house felt different today, not just quiet, but tired, as if it too was holding its breath. Walter began sorting through everything. Old passbooks, a CD that would not mature for 8 more months, the life insurance policy he had once adjusted quietly when Claire turned 25. A letter from Social Security that made his hands tremble, not because it was new, but because it reminded him just how little his life cost on paper. He did the math 3 times, all in, if he scraped the savings, broke the CD, sold the car, and deferred property taxes, he might come up with $38,000, still more than $60,000 short. He stared at the numbers. He closed the folder. He stood and walked to the kitchen window. Outside, the lawn needed mowing. The azaleas were wild again. The paint on the fence was starting to peel, even though he had done it himself just 3 years ago. The swing Claire used to love hung slightly crooked now, the rope fraying where it met the branch. Walter looked at it for a long time. Then, without thinking, he walked out to the backyard. The grass brushed his ankles. The wind carried the soft hum of birdsong and distant traffic. He stood under the tree, reached up, and steadied the swing. Then he sat down on it, carefully, slowly, and let it creak beneath him. It held, it always had. He looked up at the sky through the branches. It was strange, he thought, how life reduced itself, not to what you earned, but to what you chose to keep carrying. Back inside, he made a list, not a list of debts or accounts, but of people who might help. Neighbors, old friends. Jerry from the church group. Evelyn, whose roof he had repaired after the hurricane. Mike, who had borrowed his snowblower 3 winters in a row and always returned it full of gas. He made calls, left voicemails, had short conversations filled with warmth and awkward silences. Some promised small things, 200 here, 500 there. Some offered kind words, memories, stories. One offered to come help mow the lawn, but no one had what he needed, and he didn't expect them to. That evening, Walter sat in his recliner, the one with the worn armrest and the cushion that sank a little too far. The envelope Claire had left was still on the table. He had not touched it. He had no answers yet, just questions, and the quiet understanding that maybe she had not come looking for love or even guidance, but for something she thought he could give because he always had. But this time, he couldn't. Not like that. Not with money. Only with something quieter, something older. The truth. And that would have to be enough. Father's Day arrived with a kind of stillness only early summer could bring. The sky was cloudless, blue stretching wide over the neighborhood like a painting left out to dry. The air was warm but gentle, the kind of heat that wrapped itself around your shoulders instead of pressing on your chest. Walter had been awake since dawn. He had ironed his shirt the night before, chosen a plain navy blue one, clean, pressed, and appropriate. He wore his only pair of slacks that still held a crease and polished his shoes until they looked almost new. The roast was already in the oven, slow cooking under layers of herbs and care. The potatoes were roasting beside it, and a simple salad waited in the fridge, covered neatly with plastic wrap. At 11:45, he set the table. 4 places: blue china, polished silverware, a small vase of tulips he had picked up at the farmer's market the day before. Claire always liked tulips. Or maybe she had once. He couldn't remember the last time she mentioned flowers. By 11:50, he stood at the front window, watching. At exactly noon, a car pulled up. A sleek black one, clean, modern, everything Walter's old sedan was not. Claire stepped out first. She wore a cream-colored dress and modest heels. Her hair was up. Her sunglasses covered her expression. She was followed by Helen, who wore light makeup and a muted gray cardigan, and then Richard, tall, tan, confident, walked around the car and waved casually like he was arriving for a casual Sunday brunch, not walking into a conversation 20 years overdue. Walter opened the door before they knocked. "Well, this looks familiar," Richard said lightly as he stepped inside. "Walter," Helen said, polite but distant. Claire nodded. "Hi, Dad." Walter's heart thudded at the word. She hadn't used it in months, maybe longer. It was said quickly, almost out of habit, but it was there. "Welcome," he said. "I hope you're hungry." The living room had been tidied to perfection. Shoes aligned by the door, cushions fluffed. A soft jazz record played on low from the corner turntable, one of Claire's childhood favorites. They sat at the table. Richard launched into a story about a client in Connecticut who wanted to remodel a second kitchen. Claire smiled politely, nodding at the right places. Helen added the occasional comment. Walter served the roast in thick slices, offered rolls, poured water, and watched quietly. Claire wasn't eating much. Walter finally asked, "Everything all right?" She glanced at Richard. He reached into his blazer and pulled out a white envelope, placing it on the table between the breadbasket and the tulips. "We figured it'd be easier this way," Richard said. "No back and forth." Claire opened the envelope. Her hands stilled. "It's the full amount," Richard added. 100,000. No strings. I want you to start strong." Claire closed the envelope, her eyes unreadable. Then she leaned over and kissed Richard on the cheek. "Thank you," she said softly. Walter sat still, fork in hand, heart beating in his ears. She had not looked at him. He set the fork down, wiped his mouth with a napkin, and stood. "You're right," he said quietly. "I'm not your father." The room froze. Claire's head snapped toward him. "What?" Walter left and returned a moment later with a weathered manila folder. He placed it gently on the table, beside the tulips. He looked directly at Claire. "You were adopted." No one moved. "You were almost 2. Your mother and I picked you up from a foster agency in Spokane. You wouldn't let go of the blanket they gave you. You cried the whole ride home, then clung to my shirt like it was the only thing keeping you here." Claire blinked, the color draining from her face. "You're lying." "No," Helen said quietly. "He's not." Claire turned to her mother. "You knew?" Helen nodded. "We were going to tell you when you turned 16, then 21, but it never felt like the right time." "You let me think he was my—" Claire's voice cracked. Walter's was calm. "I may not have given you your name, but I gave you your first bike, your favorite bedtime story, the sandwich with no crust, the seat in the front row of every recital." "I called Richard my real father," Claire whispered. Walter nodded. "I know." "I slapped you," she said, breath catching. "I've had worse," he replied gently. Silence settled in like fog. Claire stared at the folder, then back at Walter. "Why didn't you tell me?" He took a breath. "Because I didn't want you to love me out of guilt or obligation. I wanted you to love me because you knew I was here, because you remembered who held your hand through the flu, and your first heartbreak, and the night you crashed the car and thought I'd be furious. But I just asked if you were okay." Her eyes filled. "I don't remember that night." "You had a cut on your forehead," Walter said. "You asked me if I still loved you. I told you I always would." Claire stood, slowly, like every part of her body had forgotten how. She walked to him. Her eyes did not look angry now, or confused. They looked like someone seeing something clearly for the first time. She reached out and took his hand. Her voice trembled. "I didn't see you." "You do now," he said. She leaned into him, not a polite hug, not a performative embrace, but fully, all the way in. Like a daughter coming home. Richard stood. "Claire." She looked at him over Walter's shoulder. "Not now." Helen rose too, hesitating. She touched Claire's back gently. Then she turned to Walter. "Thank you for raising her." Walter didn't answer. He just nodded. There was nothing else to say. Not yet. The next morning, Walter woke up before the alarm. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, his sleep had been deep. Not dreamless, but calm. Like the body finally understood it could stop bracing for disappointment. The light filtering through the curtains was soft and gold, stretching over the floor like a quiet blessing. The house was still, but it no longer felt empty. He made coffee slowly, the way he liked it, boiling water, pouring over fresh grounds in a ceramic dripper. The scent filled the kitchen, weaving through the air like something familiar, something safe. He added just a splash of cream, stirred twice, and stood for a moment with both hands around the warm mug. There was no knock, no message, no car in the driveway. But there was peace, and that, for now, was more than enough. Claire called that afternoon. Her voice was quiet. No pitch, no performance. Just her. "Hey, Dad," she said. The word held weight this time. Walter smiled into the receiver. "Hey, Claire. I was wondering if you'd like to go through some of the old boxes together. Photos, tapes. I found some VHS converters online. I could order one." "That sounds good," he said. "They're still in the hall closet, top shelf, behind the blankets." "I remember." A pause. "I'm sorry it took me this long." Walter stirred his coffee slowly, listening to the silence on the line. "It doesn't matter," he said. "You're here now." Saturday morning came with birdsong and sun. Claire arrived just after 9, holding 2 large coffees and a paper bag of pastries. She wore jeans, sneakers, and no makeup. Her hair was tied back loosely, and when she smiled at him from the porch, Walter felt something old settle into place. "Still like French roast?" she asked. He nodded. "With cream." I remembered. They sat at the kitchen table and shared breakfast. No business pitches, no forced conversation, just soft laughter, crumbs on napkins, and stories that rose slowly from memory. Afterward, they opened the closet and pulled down the boxes. Tapes labeled in thick black marker. Claire. First Snowfall. Claire. Christmas '97. Claire. Dance Recital. Claire. Sleeping in Laundry Basket. "I didn't know you kept these," she said, holding one tape like it was fragile. "You always asked me to film," Walter said. "So I did." They spent the afternoon sorting them, by date, by memory, by laughter. Claire paused at one labeled Claire, age 5, saying, "I'm not adopted." She blinked. "You labeled it that?" Walter shrugged gently. It was funny at the time. "What did I say?" "You looked straight into the camera and yelled, 'I'm your real daughter.'" She chuckled, then looked down at the tape again. "I guess I was right." "You always were." They moved to the living room. Claire sat on the carpet with a pile of tapes, organizing them while Walter brought out an old photo album from the hallway shelf. He opened it slowly, the pages soft from decades of touch. Claire sat beside him. She leaned against his shoulder, just slightly, a natural movement. They turned the pages together, snapshots of birthdays, Halloween costumes, skinned knees, missing teeth, playgrounds. A camping trip where she had worn both a tutu and a raincoat because she had refused to choose. Claire pointed at a photo. That's the swing, from the backyard. Walter smiled, still hanging there. I thought it was taller when I was a kid. You were shorter. She grinned. I thought I'd fly off into space if I went too high. You almost did once, he said. I caught you. She leaned her head against him fully now. I'm sorry for all the years I didn't ask about you. You were living, Walter said. That's what I wanted. She was quiet for a long moment, then, but you were waiting. I was hoping, he corrected gently. Never demanded, just hoped. She turned a page, her hand resting on his wrist. You were always enough. I just forgot how to see it. They stayed like that until the sun began to tilt the light sideways through the blinds. The tapes were sorted. The photos were back in their albums. A fresh pot of coffee sat cooling on the counter. Claire stood and stretched. I want to come back next week. Maybe digitize these. You could narrate them. Walter raised an eyebrow. Narrate? Yeah, your voice, your memories, like a documentary of us. He chuckled. Might be a short film. It'll be real. That's better. She looked around the living room. I never noticed how full this house is. Not with stuff, with story. Walter didn't say anything. He just looked at her. And in that look was every bedtime, every lunchbox, every time he stayed silent when he could have argued, and chose love instead. Claire reached into her tote bag. I brought something. She handed him a folded card, handmade. The cover was drawn with marker, a little messy, a little crooked, but the kind of crooked that feels honest. Inside she had written, You are my real father, always were, always will be. Walter didn't speak. His hands trembled slightly. I wasn't sure when I made it if I'd give it to you, she said. But now I am. He looked up, eyes glassy. Thank you, he said softly. Claire leaned down and kissed his temple. Thank you for staying. The summer moved quietly after that, not with fanfare, not with grand gestures, but with small, steady rhythms that brought life back into old corners. Claire came every Saturday. At first, just for coffee and photo boxes. Then for longer visits where they digitized tapes and cooked meals together. She stopped wearing watches, stopped checking her phone, started bringing new stories instead of excuses. Walter, for his part, didn't ask for more than what she gave. He kept the same routines, the same coffee method, the same seat at the kitchen table. But now there was always a second mug set across from him, ready. It had become something of a ritual. 2 mugs, a stack of tapes, and Walter's voice, low, measured, narrating the moments captured by his old camcorder. The way Claire squealed when she got her first puppy. The way she cried when her snowman melted overnight. The way she danced in the rain with a red umbrella that flipped inside out. They laughed more now. Not the nervous kind, but the kind that came from memory, from knowing and being known. One Sunday morning, Claire came without coffee. She carried only a small box under one arm and a folded blanket. What's that? Walter asked. She smiled. A project. They walked to the backyard together. The air was warm, the breeze light. The swing still hung from the tree, its rope now reinforced with new twine Claire had helped him tie 2 weeks ago. She spread the blanket under the tree and opened the box. Inside were printed photos, frames from the old tapes, digitally cleaned, moments paused, mid-laugh, mid-fall, mid-life. She began pinning them to a thin string she stretched between 2 branches, a gallery in the trees. Walter stood beside her, silent. She pointed to one image, Claire, age 7, sitting on his shoulders at a 4th of July parade, cotton candy in one hand, her free arm raised high like a queen waving to her kingdom. You remember that day? She asked. I remember you dropped the candy, Walter said, and you bought me another one. He nodded. That was a good parade. She added a final photo, the one she had taken last week, just the 2 of them, side by side, smiling into the soft evening light. Below it, she placed the card. You are my real father. Always were. Always will be. The wind fluttered the edges of the photos, making them sway like small flags of memory. Walter sat down on the blanket beside her. Why all this? He asked gently. Claire looked around, then back at him. Because I spent years building things that didn't last, she said. This is what I want to last. They sat there for a long while. No music, no conversation, just the sound of leaves above and memory below. Walter closed his eyes for a moment, not from weariness, but from peace. That night, after Claire left, Walter returned to the backyard with a flashlight and stood under the string of photos. He looked at each one again, slowly, reverently, and then he did something small, but sacred. He added one more. It was not a photo of Claire. It was a photo of the swing, alone, still, hanging gently from the branch that had held it all these years. He pinned it to the far edge of the string and stepped back. Because sometimes, the things that carry us the longest deserve to be remembered too. Sometimes the most powerful moments are the quietest ones, the ones where no one is speaking, but everything is being said. In a backyard filled with sunlight and old memories, a father and daughter sat beneath a tree, not to fix the past, but to honor it. Around them, photographs swayed gently in the breeze, like silent witnesses to the years that had passed, and the love that had always been there, waiting to be seen. This story was never about grand revelations or perfect endings. It was about the quiet dignity of a man who loved without asking to be noticed, and a daughter who finally remembered how to look. Walter didn't shout or accuse or demand. He simply stayed. And in that stillness, in that unwavering presence, he allowed truth to speak for itself. There is a lesson here, one we often forget in a world that moves too fast to see the small things. Hold your dignity, speak your truth, and be willing to wait for understanding to catch up, not out of pride, but out of love. Because sometimes healing doesn't arrive in thunder or applause. It arrives on a quiet morning, in a kitchen filled with the smell of coffee and the sound of old tapes being rewound. Like the swing still hanging from the tree long after the child has grown, love has a way of remaining, even when forgotten, even when called by the wrong name, even when judged by its silence. And just like a porch light left on in the night, a simple act of steadfast kindness can guide someone home, no matter how far they've wandered. So maybe this is a good moment to pause, to think about the people in our lives who stayed steady while we were busy proving something to the world. To remember that not every hero walks with fanfare. Some just walk beside us, holding our history quietly in their hands. And if this story touched something in you, something quiet and true, maybe take a little piece of that warmth and pass it along. There might be someone, somewhere, waiting to be seen for who they've always been. Let that seeing begin with you. Let love speak, not with noise, but with presence.